this point. We're going to have roll call. I guess I do the roll call.
I can do that,
Okay, that'd be great.
if you don't mind. Committee Member Jones.
Here.
Committee Member Redwine.
Here.
Committee Member Winning.
Here.
And absent is Committee Member Weber and Butler.
Okay. We do have enough for a quorum. So we can go ahead and convene the meeting because we do have a quorum today. Do we have any public comment? No public comment? Okay. Then we will move right along to discuss the items related to Measure R transactions.
Okay, included in today's packet were the financials year-to-date that were provided by Mr. Shad, the Auditor Controller. If any of you have any questions about those, he's here with us to answer those.
Okay. I have one. Are we still missing another planning person for county planning? Is that why none of the funds have been used yet?
Well, so we just hired the planning person the last week of the first quarter. So they've been hired, but we haven't applied the costs yet. Waiting for this December will be the end of the second quarter, and then we'll capture those costs.
Okay, and I have another question. As far as animal control goes, I notice it's still under livestock. I know there was a debate a little while back about it going to the sheriff's office. Has that been settled yet? Has that been settled?
Yeah, it was already done. I think it was done in the last supervisors meeting.
Okay, because I thought when I looked at that, I thought it was a little convoluted. They didn't know if they were going to do it or if they did it, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, they're doing the transitioning now.
They're doing the transition. Okay, is it still going to be a no-kill shelter, or is it going to be the way it is?
I don't think that's been discussed or decided. Over the past few months, the board had given direction to administration to work with Ag and the Sheriff's Department to do the transition,
Okay.
to implement a plan. And then on the 13th, the meeting on the 13th, just last week, they actually did the formal approval to transfer all of the administrative functions over to the Sheriff's Office effective January 1st of 2023.
So then
And we're in the process of relocating agriculture to another location also, so it'll just be animal services at the current
at the
location.
current location.
Yep.
Okay, so then my next question would be then this line item for livestock is that going to be transitioned into the sheriff's department, or is that going to stay as a separate fund?
It's going to stay separate.
It's gonna stay
So
separate.
it'll be a division of the sheriff's office. And currently in the sheriff's office, we have the jail, patrol,
Right.
Boating and safety. So this will be another division under that umbrella. So
Under
we'll keep
that.
it broke out to clearly see what's being expended.
Okay.
But it'll be under the sheriff's privy, but it's going to be a separate
And it's going to
department.
still be a separate line item?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
One thing that I'd like to make note of is that the revenue that you see in this budget for this year was only projected through the election because of the uncertainty of Measure R. And since Measure R has actually survived the election and we still have Measure R with us, that'll have to have a budget revision in order to add those additional revenues for the remainder of the fiscal year. And so we'll be talking to Mr. Shad about that and then bringing it back to the board at probably a meeting in January.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I was going to say we should have probably a meeting in January, late January, maybe February, if it's okay with you guys. That way we can take another peek at what's going on. I don't have any other questions. Anybody else have any questions on what's going on? Okay. All right, so I guess we've already discussed the review, the financial reports so far. We're going to discuss the Measure R cleanup project, which I believe is,
Yes, I can take that one.
okay,
Yeah, as requested by Committee Member Jones for this to be added to the agenda today. On the October 19th, 2022 meeting, there was a item taken to the board to approve and authorize a standing working group for developing a county strategy for addressing the homelessness. And in that request was an approval of $50,000 from the Measure R budget to the Code Enforcement Division for implementation of a cleanup strategy that was developed through that working group. And the project that was identified by the working group was located between Elk Valley Road and Union Street, east of Michigan Avenue. And the projected use of the $50,000 for Measure R would be used for disposal costs of RVs and trailers, hiring operations equipment, tow trucks, transfer station fees, and placement of K-rail and other barrier materials needed to secure the area once it's cleaned up. I don't know if you have any questions about that. That item was approved by the board, and so there will be $50,000 transferred to code enforcement for that cleanup project.
Well, I think that raises a lot of questions for me, because it's a specific project. Measure R funds, I don't believe, were supposed to be used for acquiring properties, if I'm not mistaken. They said they were going to try and acquire the properties.
That's part of the whole plan for the working group from that strategy. The Measure R funding will not be used for that at this time. The $50,000 for the items that I just read off would be for the cleanup and securing that location. Code enforcement has been deemed a vital service through Measure R, which is why we fund one of their officers.
Right.
And so this is funding their cleanup project.
Okay, because the way I was reading it, it was kind of like through the whole process, they were going to purchase the properties or eminent domain or whatever they do to acquire the properties along with that, and that wasn't part of the Measure R funding.
That was listed in the board report. That was listed in the board report, and from an overall strategy standpoint for the committee, the working group, that will be part of the process. So we can clean up those properties, actually secure them, and block them off. If it's county-owned, it makes that a lot easier than dealing with private landowners.
Right.
And so that'll be part of the process for sure. The working group is an ongoing group. We're still meeting and talking about other funding as well, grant funding for this whole process.
Okay.
Who are the participants in this work group?
There
Who are they and where are they?
Yeah, there are lots of us actually. We've actually broke out into subcommittees this last meeting, but it includes staff from administration, county council, community development department, code enforcement, treasurer tax collector's office. We also have members from True North. We have members from behavior health from the county. I think we have city people who have participated in the last meeting. I'm trying to remember all of them, sorry. I think Smith River Alliance actually had a representative there as well. So it's community stakeholders who are interested in the homelessness issue and the homelessness encampments. I believe Daphne Cortez from Mission Possible was there also. Possible.
Okay, yeah. Well, my next question was going to be, they mentioned holders and who would those actually be, but you answered that.
Covered that. Yeah, because I was mainly concerned that the Measure R funds were going to start going pigeonholed into doing this whole project, and that was my biggest concern, because that's not what Measure R was, supposed to be at this point.
Yeah, there's definitely a possibility, while we are bringing in Measure R revenue, that they will be used for code enforcement projects. They have a limited budget. I think their professional services is typically around $30,000 to $50,000 per year, and one project can wipe that out in a hurry.
Right.
And so for Measure R funding to support those projects, it allows them to do more. Now that they have an additional officer, they're able to do more.
Right, and I understand that. I think I speak for everybody on the board. Our biggest concern is we don't want to start seeing that money getting pigeonholed into doing, more than just what code enforcement does. And I think that was our biggest concern at this point. Was that we just want to make sure that that's, that it doesn't go all of a sudden. Somebody says, "Oh, I want to take $1 million of the Measure R funds and do this." That has nothing to do with it, and I think that was our biggest concern. Or I know that was my biggest concern.
I agree. My concern is I don't want Measure R to be a slush fund for people to come back and keep dipping and dipping. I'd really expect some results, but it bothers me, especially when the onus is on the county to do all the work, but we don't put the onus on the encampments to clean up or have a part of that. So that is my concern, is that money, I think you can blow through $50,000 really, really fast. And I don't want to come back where we see, I'd rather go to see this, add positions or give people a raise at some point than just letting this money dribble out.
Yes, understood, thank you. Yeah, the good part about this, as far as having a strategy going forward, which is why we have all these stakeholders involved, is to actually try to clean up the encampments and have some solutions going forward, so they don't just move to another location, or that they go right back into the same locations. We've cleaned up a property in the past, and then there's so limited, support as far as like watching these locations and making sure that they don't move back into locations, that they're just right back in the same state that they were prior to the cleanup. And so the whole idea by having this strategy and involving all the stakeholders is trying to get something to go forward where we're actually making some progress. And the use of Measure R funds could easily, we have an item on here today, which is item D, we can talk a little bit more about that, is looking at potential projects. A lot of the folks who had talked about Measure R said that we hadn't really done much with our funds, and the whole idea behind that, as you guys all know, is to build up some of those funds, get a fund balance so we can actually start doing some projects for some of the facilities that the public uses on a regular basis and try to improve some of those facilities. So like I said, at item D, we can talk a little bit more about that.
So, for example, you brought up that there's already been a couple of cleanup projects, and the two that I see most prevalently are the on Washington Street by the water tank, that there was a lot of encampments that was back in there. They went in, they cleaned them out, and then they limbed the trees so that you could see it when you drive by, and they weren't able to hide back in there. Similar there on Old Mill, there was encampment right there on the corner because, again, couldn't see him because of the trees. Who took care of those two places? Do you know off the top of your head who took care of those? Was it code enforcement? And where did those funds come from in order to do that? Because that would be similar in nature, wouldn't it?
Those were not code enforcement. I believe it was Take a Bite Out of Blight or something like that. There was some kind of an organization that was kind of spearheaded by Supervisor Gitlin at the time. I think those were the projects that he put into place. It wasn't code enforcement, to my knowledge. The one that
okay.
code enforcement had done is similar to, it's kind of in the same area we're looking at now, and it was through a grant. We received grant funding, and there was, I think it was, I can't remember how much it was, but it was, several tens of thousands of dollars, I think kind of in probably near 150,000. Clint, does that sound right, or do you remember that?
For which project?
The cleanup project that was done through that grant, I don't know if there's
Yeah, I remember. I know that the county was involved. It was Bite Out of Blight, or at least building maintenance and recreation were involved with the corner of Old Mill and Northcrest. So we were involved in that, but it could have been through the Bite Out of Blight program. And as far as the water tower goes, I'm not sure on that one. I'm not sure if that falls within the county or city or.
Because
I'm not
both
sure.
of those are probably private property.
I would imagine, yeah.
Or the one on Washington by the water tank is probably just the water tank itself is, city or county, but,
It's
all
probably
right.
owned by the water company.
Yeah, I think that's a mix of privately owned and publicly owned land right there.
Okay, all right. And my thought behind it too is because of those being right out there, they're visible. The ones that this one's referring to is pretty much off the beaten path, and it's probably going to be more difficult to keep it cleaned up without the K-rails. Because even though you got K-rails at the end of State Street, still gets a lot of traffic back in there. You can see where the people are walking back and forth and hanging out still there. They're still taking stuff in there. And then like behind the Washington Street Fire Department, in fact, I mean, they had a fire back in there not too long ago from one of those. There's an encampment. And even though it's not accessible by vehicle, a lot of foot traffic is going back in there, and they're taking stuff back in there. So those are just the ones that I'm aware of. So, okay. Thank you.
Okay. That Bite Out of Blight, was that a grant fund that Gitlin did, or did that come out of the general fund for the cleanup? Do you
I think
recall?
it's just a community organization. It wasn't part of the county,
It wasn't part of the county. There was no county funds done with that.
not that I'm aware of, unless we had county departments that assisted in some of the cleanups. That's where the county funds would be coming in, and that'd be under their regular duties anyway, if it was code enforcement or building maintenance or road department.
Okay. Okay. Do we have any other questions? No? Okay. We'll go on to the next item. I was wondering if people on the board here would like to go on a tour of the jails, see what they look like, see what, maybe we can try and help them get a little cash to do some painting or something along those lines. Are you guys interested in anything like that? Because I talked to the sheriff a couple of weeks ago, and he said he'd be up for it. I can give him I can give him an email and say, hey, we'd like to come by and take a look. You know, because I know the jails are in very bad repair at this point. And if we can try and help, maybe funnel a little bit of funds to at least get the place painted and cleaned up, maybe even if it's just on the outside, so it doesn't look so shabby. But
Yeah, if you want to, this item's on here to discuss, and if you want to give us possible direction to schedule something with the sheriff.
Yeah, that'd be
We
awesome.
can work on that for you and schedule something for
Yeah,
the
that'd be
committee to
great.
go
You
over
guys
and visit the jail.
Yeah.
And just so you're aware, on the capital improvement project right now, there is the jail painting project. We've gone out to bid a couple different times on that project and didn't receive any responsive bids that were within our budget. Unfortunately, all the contractors who responded were out of the area, and in most cases were triple what the budget was in order to paint the facility. So we're still working on that. Right now, we, just at the last board meeting, you guys may have seen or didn't see that there was an item on there to approve a contract with an architect and engineering firm. We have struggled for as long as I can remember to find somebody to come up here and actually do the work. We finally have found somebody, and so we're working with them right now to look at doing, giving us options on the jail and a renovation of the jail and a rehab of the jail, the entire jail, both the old side and the new side. And so we're pretty excited about that. We have the little over $3 million that was in federal appropriations last fiscal year, and they're just waiting for us to develop some projects and some cost estimates so we can actually access those funds, and we're doing that now. So that's the exciting part about having this engineer. They're going to give some cost estimates.
Okay, now, excuse me. With that being said, is one of the options of maybe building a new jail? And the reason I say that, because I'm a retired building inspector, and there's a lot of times where it's cheaper and better to build new than it is to try and renovate what you have. And because renovations, you know as well as I do, once you start getting into it, it's a Pandora's box more times than not. So I don't know if that was put on the table or not, because to me it would make sense that you got a lot right across the street that you could have the jail itself and then have the sheriff's offices right there.
Yeah, that will be one of the options.
That will
We
be.
asked them to include that as an option. Just at their original estimates were that it would be less expensive, of course, to renovate the current facility. They're saying the new side is actually not in very bad condition. It's actually still in pretty good condition.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest concern is the old side of the jail, which is what we've been focusing on also, to make it just more up to date and kind of maybe mirror the newer side. So there are several different options they're supposed to provide through this project.
Oh, okay, I just throwing it out there. Okay. Do we have any other questions on that? Okay, well, let's move on to the potential projects for Measure R, which is the next item.
I had added this item to the agenda just to give the committee an update on the capital improvement project plan for the county. We're currently going through the process with building maintenance and the building department to update our capital improvement project. And what they're doing is going to each of the owned county facilities and making a list of projects that need to be done, more so based on deferred maintenance that hasn't been done over the years due to staffing and other things like resources, having funding available for some of the larger projects. With some of the one-time funding that's available, as well as the Measure R funds for vital services, we're going through to update this plan. and there's a potential that we'll be bringing back projects to the committee just for consideration and make you aware of some of the things that we're looking at. Some of the things we're trying to focus on outside of actual infrastructure projects, because of the cost of an infrastructure project is several millions of dollars. As you all know, we're just over a year with the Measure R stuff, and adding this year's revenue will help as well, but we're going to start focusing a little bit more on some of the public facilities that are used by our public a lot. Our recreation fields over here, which were used by over 1,000 youth every single year. You know, the Veterans Memorial Building that needs repair of the parking lot, the kitchen, things like that are very, I mean, those are vital services for our community and vital buildings for our community, as well as our parks. Our parks bring a lot of people into this area every year. Florence Keller and Camp and Ruby, they're rented by locals, and they are, just based on the camp revenues over the past 2 or 3 years, we're seeing more and more people use those facilities, and so of course they're getting more and more run down as well. And so to keep those upgraded so we can keep attracting people to come to this area. So those are some of the projects that we'll be considering with Measure R funds as vital services.
Okay. I have a question, back on the jail section. Do we have does the county have a regular painting department? You don't have staff painters?
No, we had talked about using force account. At one time, we had a group that was on staff through one of our local agencies. I think it was Rural Human Services. If I remember correctly, it was a workforce center or something like that. So we had several people, additional staff, and we had talked about using force account for painting the jail. Once we were able to secure this engineer and architect firm to look at the jail, we didn't know how far down the road we wanted to go to paint the entire outside of the jail if we were going to be renovating it, because we didn't know what that would include. So we're trying to see what that project's going to entail before we actually paint the facility. Painting may be the last thing we do if we were able to renovate it. It didn't make a lot of sense to spend a couple $100,000 and then start tearing walls.
I was just curious if
Yeah, but we don't have an internal paint department. It would be our building maintenance department.
Okay. Do we have any questions or anything? What about having the next meeting? When do you guys want to have another meeting? What's? Yeah, I was thinking January, maybe the last part of January. Because that way we'll have, the holidays will be behind us and we'll have a better idea of what's going on. Sure. Sound good?
Exactly. That sounds good, yeah.
Everybody just about chose this day, and only 3 of us.
Well, they must have partied on the patio over the weekend.
Okay, I'll have Kylie send out another poll, and we'll get a date secured for January, the end of January. Sounds good.
Yeah, somewhere around there. That way you'll probably be able to give us a little bit more information on some of the projects you guys are looking at by then.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have the CIP a little bit further towards completion. I think that in talking with Alan, the building maintenance director, he was almost through all the facilities already. So it'll just be kind of finalizing that, sending it out to the departments to make sure his list includes everything that they're thinking of as far as our consignees are aware of for their facilities, and then just getting it through the proper process of getting it approved by the board.
So, okay.
Is all the sidewalks that they put in on the Washington off-ramp, was that a Caltrans project?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you kind of looking in the future on sidewalks or anything for the county? I know we have a lot of streets that don't have much. I was just curious.
Yeah, the one really good thing about just recently getting an engineer on staff is we, for the first time in over a decade, I think 12 or 13 years, we have an engineer, which has been huge already. He's only been here for a month, I think, or a little over a month. Just having the ability to look at projects and give you kind of a rough estimate of what things are going to cost is a huge benefit. So he's a welcome, and we're pretty excited to have somebody on staff like that, and I think it'll help identify projects also, because for the longest time we do have an engineer who was working for the county, but it was one person. Again, similar to a lot of our departments when you have one person trying to do the job of 10 people. So having that additional person will help us a lot to identify infrastructure projects like that.
Good.
Those projects get spendy real quick,
Yeah, I know they do.
especially with concrete. Because the concrete they use is very, very expensive. It's not normal. It's not stuff you use for housing. So, all right, anybody else have any other questions, comments? Want to throw tomatoes? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll call this meeting at 10:25 this morning, and we will have a meeting in late January.
All right, thank you all.
Thanks for
Thanks.
coming, everybody. Appreciate it.